The End, a vast desolate wasteland, composed almost entirely of endstone and chorus plants. And between these empty landscapes are bizarre cities that twist into the sky. These end cities are the only locations of note in the End, besides the main End Island. Not much has changed about the End after the 1.9 combat update, which was released over a decade ago. In 10 years, the End has barely seen any changes since then. I believe it is time Mojang finally updates the End. But how should they do it? What would an End update actually look like? I have some ideas myself, but I'd like to hear some of your own. The issue with updating the End, however, is that the End is meant to convey a sense of vast nothingness, with little areas of interest like the End cities. So, if the End is meant to feel empty, how do you actually add stuff to it? Well, I think there are ways to update the End without overcrowding it with features. This means keeping the old End generation relatively the same or entirely the same, kind of like how the Nether Waste biome was the old Nether, just the entirety of it, but now it's its own single biome. The End Wastes could be considered the old End terrain generation, but now there could be unique End forests that generate. While the Nether represents a hellish dimension, the End, on the other hand, represents a more bizarre and alien environment. It could be populated with strange and unusual creatures. One idea that I like to propose is they could add more End-related animals that also fall under the arthropod category, which could give the Bane of Arthropods enchantment more use, especially if these animals are stronger. And it would be more beneficial to use Bane of Arthropods than Sharpness, at least in these specific use cases. There are plenty of End-related designs that I believe Mojang could borrow from Minecraft Dungeons. The only real reason to go to the End Islands is to get an Elytra and shulker boxes. And once you've done those things, you don't really need to go back, ever. Unless you ever run out of shulker boxes or need more Elytras, there isn't really a reason to go back. The End ends up feeling like a place that you go to early on in your world and then only return to if you need it, if you need those items. Compare this to the Nether. On the other hand, the Nether is a location that you go to. For example, traveling 1 block in the Nether is the equivalent of traveling 8 blocks in the overworld. This means that the Nether is an excellent source of fast travel, whereas the End only really works as a form of fast travel if you need to get back to your spawn location, but even then it's super niche and not really common. Outside of this though, the Nether also just has more structures and areas to explore than the End. First of all, the Nether has more than one biome, including Soul Sand Valleys, Basalt Deltas, Nether Waste, Crimson Forest, Warped Forest. You get the idea. There's just more locations to explore in the Nether compared to the End. There's even Nether fortresses and bastions. While End cities do have solid loot, they're the only structure to explore in the End. Another idea that is pretty common online is the idea of an End exclusive ore called Enderite. I think if they were to actually add an ore to the End, it probably wouldn't be called Enderite because it's already so popular online. But if they did add an ore to the End, I do have some ideas of how it could be a little more interesting than a normal ore. So instead of digging down the End Islands to mine the ore, it would spawn on the sides of these end islands. What this means is that it offers a completely different dynamic to mining this ore than any others. And now that we have happy gas, you could fly underneath these end islands and mine the enderite ore that way. Or you could simply scaffold and mine them that way. These are just some textures I made as more of a proof of concept. And once you do finally mine this rare enderite ore, you could then combine it with diamonds in a similar way that you combine ancient debris with gold to form a netherite ingot. Except in this case, it's enderite and diamonds. Why diamonds, you ask? Well, the game currently has an overinflation of diamonds, and what this means is that it would give players an option of using their diamonds to create even better tools. Now, I don't think enderite should be a straight up upgrade from netherite per se, but I do think it could be a diamond upgrade, if only slightly. In the same way that netherite increases knockback and slight armor boosts, enderite could give you a slight armor boost while also providing a completely different effect than knockback resistance. As for what effect the armor could apply, it could instead give a resistance to projectiles, seeing as shulkers, one of the main enemies of the end, use bullets as their source of damage. There could even be some lore implications here that ancient builders in the end mined for enderite and created armor that way to help defend themselves against shulkers. Just an idea, but I think it's cool when ideas like this come together and create lore implications. Another idea that I came up with is we could finally see what the Elytra came from. Currently, Elytra are only found inside end ships, but this doesn't really make sense for it to be their natural location. Like, perhaps the old inhabitants of the end harvested the elytra from a creature that lives in the end somewhere. This creature would most likely be a beetle-like creature with an end-related design, as that would just fit the end better. And elytra in real life do come from beetles, so I think it would be neat to see if they would add end-related beetle enemy to the end to show that this is where the elytra actually come from. Of course, if they did this, they would have to add another way of obtaining the elytra, or at least a maybe elytra component in a similar way to the Music Disc 5. There are Music Disc 5 fragments. There could be elytra fragments, just as a second way of obtaining an elytra that you could do instead of going to an end city. You could hunt these end beetles and obtain elytra fragments that way. Just an idea, but I do think it would be neat to have an alternative way of crafting the elytra outside of the current method. And those are just some of my ideas that they could include in a potential end update in the future. I think realistically, if Mojang were to add an end update soon, they would probably do something that we don't expect at all. Oftentimes, a lot of the most popular ideas of updating the end are the ones that Mojang knows that if they ever do add anything similar to it, then the community will most likely end up complaining anyways that this feature wasn't like I saw in this fan-made concept and stuff like that. I think Mojang likes to surprise us in their updates and do things that are just totally unexpected. So these are just some of my ideas, and they're by no means the most original. I have seen the concept of enderite or an end ore for a long time. This is just my take on it and how I think it would work. But yeah, what do you guys think? Should the end stay untouched, or should Mojang finally update the end? I think given enough time, it seems inevitable that the end will be updated eventually. The question is, in how long? So, should the end undergo a massive design shift, or should it stay mostly the same, with little pieces of new content to explore? As I mentioned, I think the idea of, again, little oasis biomes in the end would be neat to try and explore and locate. It would keep the end still mostly vast and desolate, as I believe is the current design philosophy of the end biome and the environment that they're aiming to achieve. Anyways, if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. With that said, I hope you all have a wonderful day.